Oh, you kind of hang on for dear life, don't you, when we sing those hymns? Thanks so much. Thanks for joining in with excitement on thy great name we praise. Our speaker this morning is Charles Zimmerman. Dr. Zimmerman is on the faculty of Biblical Seminary in Hatfield. He teaches practical preaching to those seminarians. He also does it. He's the teaching pastor at Calvary Church in Souderton, Pennsylvania, a large church with multiple ministries. If you're ever up there on a Sunday morning and have a chance to drop in, you will be blessed by worshiping with them. It's a pleasure over the years to have had him here speaking at the Tabernacle and to welcome him back this morning, Dr. Charles Zimmerman.
Thanks, Vic. Well, it's good to be back at Ocean City Tabernacle. Always good to be back in Ocean City. Having said all that, and at the risk of ruining all of that, let me say, even though many of you are on vacation and Sunday's supposed to be a day of rest, I've got to put you to work a little bit. I'm going to ask you a question that you need to answer, not out loud, but at least in your mind. And then you're going to have to remember a couple things, all right? A question and some things to remember. That'll make your morning a lot more profitable, and the time will go a little faster. It won't seem like we're here forever, all right? Here's the question. What drives you? You know what it means to drive something, right? To guide it, to aim it, to direct it. So if you drive a car, where does the car go? Where you aim it, guide it, direct it down the street. If you drive a nail, where does it go? Into the wood, where you guide it, aim it, direct it. If you drive a golf ball, where does it go? Anywhere it wants. Right? Kind of see how that works? So what drives your life? What's guiding your life? What's directing your life? What's causing your life to be aimed? And in what direction is it aimed? Let me ask another question related to that. What drives your church? My guess is lots of churches represented. What drives your church? Tradition? Making budget? Getting what you want, when you want it, the right music, the right kind of sermon, out by a certain time? What drives your church? You ever ask the question, what drives God? What is it that's guiding and aiming and directing God? That's the order that we often ask those questions, isn't it? So what's driving me, and what's driving me should influence what happens at my church and at my job and in my life. And you know what? I'm going to pray and ask God if He would come alongside and if He would give me what I'm aiming at and what I'm seeking to get. Can I submit that the questions that I just asked were in reverse order? We really should be asking the what is driving God question first. And if that question comes first, then our responsibility with our lives is to get in step with what's driving God and what He wants to see accomplished. Now, the good news is that we know what drives God. In fact, that's what the Bible's all about. The Bible explains what drives God. The bad news is we often misread the Bible. You see, we often read the Bible as if it were a collection of disconnected stories. And what we have to do then is to read one little story, come up with a point, make an application, and then go try to live that today. But that's not how the Bible is put together. And if you treat the Bible as a collection of stories that are disconnected, you're never going to understand it properly, and you won't figure out what's driving God, and your life and my life will be driven by the wrong things. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to learn how to read the Bible correctly today. And we're going to do that by walking all the way through the Bible, Genesis through Revelation, and we should be finished in time by the concert tonight. All right, you don't have anything to do today, right? Well, we'll try to do it a little faster than that. We're going to walk through the 6 acts of the biblical story, and as we learn something about each act, we're going to be hearing and learning what drives God, what's influencing Him, and therefore what needs to influence us. If we had the big storyline up there, it would look something like this. Now, those words may not mean much right now, and those images look like, a kindergartner drew them. But during the next 20 minutes, you're going to learn those words, and those images will become meaningful to you. Remember I said you have to work? You already answered the question. Some of you didn't. You need to remember now. You failed the first part. You can jump back in and remember stuff, all right? 6 acts, that's not too hard. 6 little phrases. Most of them are only 2 words long. All right, here we go. The Bible opens with God creating. Act 1, God creates. God speaks, and all that exists pops into being. In fact, the first verse of the Bible gives us the summary statement. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now, we need a reminder right up here at the front. The Bible begins with God, but God does not begin with the Bible. Does that make sense? God exists forever and ever and ever in eternity past. God does not have a beginning. So the Bible begins at the beginning, but God does not begin at the beginning. He begins in eternity past. And then he creates people that say things like, I waited forever in the checkout line. No, you did not. You waited for like an infinitesimal speck of time in your own life, let alone the history of eternity. Human beings say things like, I waited an eternity on the parkway to get to Ocean City. No, you did not. You're a liar. You waited for a speck in your life, which is beyond an infinitesimal speck on the scale of eternity. God creates. He makes a garden, and he puts man into the garden. That first man is named Adam. And when God creates Adam, he very quickly realizes there's a problem. But Adam doesn't know he has the problem yet. Like most men, right, ladies? He's a little dense, hasn't figured out the problem yet. And so God's going to bring a little instruction, training to Adam's life. So God, rather than just solving the problem before Adam knows he has the problem, God first has to highlight in Adam's mind that he's got a problem. So God says to Adam, I want you to name all the animals. So Adam starts, hippopotamus, duck-billed platypus, aardvark, and then he's getting a little bored, dog, right? Now, you need to remember, God did not assign that task to Adam because he couldn't come up with really good names for things. Here's my guess. God could have thought of better names for animals than Adam could have. God gave Adam the assignment to partner with him and to teach him something. Well, it doesn't take Adam long to realize that he really does have a problem. Even though there are all these animals and all these other creatures, none of them are like him in that he's made in the image of God and they are not. Now Adam knows he's got the problem. God then solves the problem and he creates Eve. And Adam and Eve live before God in peace and harmony and partnership. And they live with each other in peace and harmony and partnership. And they live in the world in peace and harmony and partnership. That's not a bad beginning to the story, is it? So let me ask you, how are you all doing these days at peace, harmony, partnership? Is that working out for you all? Perfect peace, perfect harmony, perfect partnership with your spouse, with your kids, with your boss, with God. And, well, what the heck happened? I mean, that was a really good beginning, but none of us live there, right? Just open any news website, read a newspaper, look at your own life. Everything's a mess, isn't it? Something's out of whack. Everything got screwed up somehow. You read the newspaper, there's death and there's violence. There's terrorism, there's hunger, there's exploitation, there's oppression. There's backstabbing, there's ego, there's getting ahead, there's cheating, there's lying. And that stuff just happened since we've been at Ocean City. I mean, our world is a mess. But it's not just the world. Our lives are a mess, right? I mean, if we're going to be honest, then you don't have to raise your hand or anything, but if you're going to be honest, there's not a marriage represented in this room that is all that God wants it to be, all that it should be, or all that it could be, right? There's not a person in this room that doesn't understand something about being addicted or enslaved to something that you'd rather not be stuck, right? And there's a little bit of that ego, and there's a lot of that selfishness, and there's a whole lot of other people wronged me, and it's not my fault, and it's their fault, and broken hearts, and tears, and pain, and bodies that are deteriorating with disease, and that's all of our story, isn't it? Well, wait a minute. If the beginning of the story is peace, harmony, and partnership, what went wrong so that everything is a mess? I'm glad you asked. Act 2. Act 2. Act 2 is God is rejected. So God creates, but in Act 2, God is rejected. Now here is kind of the paramount verse that reminds us God is rejected. The Lord God commanded the man, You are free to eat from any tree in the garden, but you must not eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, for when you eat from it, you will certainly die. Now, I've got to remind you right up front, there was no poison in the tree. This isn't some kind of poisonous tree that when you eat of it, you're going to physically die. That's not the point. It's a tree of authority. It's the tree of who's going to be God, who's going to call the shots. It's the tree of who's going to drive your life. Are you going to drive it? Are you going to guide it, direct it? Or are you going to let God guide and direct it? That's the tree. Now, it's right about at this point that women often get a bad rap. Right, ladies? Carolyn even sang it in the song, right? Kind of Eve had a bad day in the garden. And she did, but so did Adam. But let me ask, did you ever read that story real closely? Do you know that Eve was not present when God gave that command to Adam? Did you know that? It was just Adam was there. So, ladies, men, you're not allowed to answer. Ladies, I have a couple questions for you. Number one, only the women can answer. Ladies, how many of you have ever known, know, or interacted, had a conversation with a man before? Raise your hand. All right, most of you ladies, a couple of you ladies haven't. We can introduce you to a guy or so after the service, just so you can say you know one of them, all right? Yeah, you know. Now, here's the second question. How many of you ladies have ever known a man to not explain all the details of a conversation that he had during the day? Have you ever known that? Yeah, okay. So what are the chances that Adam forgot to share some important fact when he communicated that with Eve, right? Yeah, my money is on Adam not sharing completely what needed to be shared. But the point of the story is Eve ate, and Adam ate, and all hell broke loose. And ever since then, where there was unity, peace, harmony, partnership, now there is alienation, now there is discord, now there's competition, now there's infighting, now there's selfishness, now there's blame shifting. You see, when God is rejected, there are consequences, right? The consequences automatically follow. So God creates peace, harmony, partnership. God is rejected. There's now alienation, rebellion, bitterness, selfishness, strife, competition, division. All of that comes. And you know what? Adam and Eve refused to come clean. That sounds just like us, doesn't it? They're kind of caught red-handed, but they still don't come clean. They blame shift. That reminds me of a story. There was a woman looking out of her kitchen window. And as she looked out the kitchen window, she saw her German shepherd shaking the life out of the neighbor's rabbit. So the German shepherd has the rabbit in his mouth, shaking her back and forth. Now this woman, she hasn't been getting along well with the neighbors. There's a problem. This is going to be terrible. Now she runs out with a broom. She beats the German shepherd off the rabbit. The German shepherd drops the rabbit. It's all covered in doggy drool and saliva. And she picks up the rabbit, and it is deader than dead. So what's she going to do? Take the dead bunny over and say, I'm really sorry about this. My dog ate your rabbit. No, she can't do that. She's not going to come clean. She takes the rabbit into the house, turns on the faucet in the tub, kind of washes up the little bunny, gets the blow dryer out and her husband's comb. She's fluffing up the little dead rabbit. While she knows her neighbor's not going to be home for a little while, so she sneaks over, jumps over the fence, opens the bunny cage, puts the blow-dried, combed little dead bunny back into the cage, closes the door and runs back home, waiting for the inevitable scream to happen. Neighbor returns. About an hour and a half later, she hears the shriek. She runs out innocently, pretending like she knows nothing. What happened? What happened? The neighbor says, I can't believe it. Our rabbit. He died 2 weeks ago. We buried him, and now he's back. You see, there are consequences when you don't want to come clean. Well, Adam and Eve don't come clean. They blame shift. They try to get around. God creates. God is rejected. And you want to know something? We could just stop right there. There is no other religion, worldview, or philosophical system that better explains everything we see in the world except the biblical story. You look around at our beautiful world, what do you see? You see the beauty of nature. You see creation. It's breathtaking. How do we explain it? Because God creates. We look around and see the horrors of oppression and exploitation. We see, ecological terrors ravaging our world, people abusing each other. How do you explain that? Because God is rejected. We've got the first 2 chapters that explain the good and the bad and the ugly of all that we experience in life. No other philosophy can do that. Just in 2 chapters, we get the explanation for the good and the bad. Aren't you glad the story doesn't end there? If it did end there, the Bible would be short, the sermon would be short, so some of you are wondering if it should end there, but it doesn't end there. In fact, the Bible's a big book, isn't it? There are bigger books, but the Bible really only had to be short. If this is a story only of justice and holiness, the Bible would have been real short, like 2.5 chapters long. God creates, God is rejected, the end. But we've got all those other chapters. From the middle of Genesis 3 through Revelation 22, grace could be printed over top of all of those chapters and all of those words. The story could have ended after God's rejected, but God says, I won't let sin, alienation, and rebellion be the last words in this story. This story will continue. Well, the third act is the act of God promising. And so God makes promises that his original intention will be the ultimate destination. Interestingly, the first hint of a promise happens all the way back in the 3rd chapter of Genesis. Kind of right after that rejection, the first promise comes. And it's kind of hinted at. It's not real clear and explicit. You got to kind of work at it. But in essence, Genesis 3:15 says this. One day, a son will be born, and he will change everything. One day, a son's coming. The woman's going to have a son, and that son will usher in and bring. He will inaugurate God's original intention. That's kind of interesting. If I'm in Adam and Eve's shoes, I'm thinking, boy, we blew it. This is the end of the story. But a son's going to be born. We're not sure how long, but soon after that, strange things begin to happen, especially with Eve. She's a little more moody than usual. She's gaining weight. And Adam's not as enlightened and gentlemanly as we men are today. So he says, whoa, Eve, you're really packing the pounds on there. Whoa. I'm going to have to kill a much larger animal to cover you soon. What's going on? Well, Eve's pregnant, right? And my guess is, as Eve's pregnant, and as that new life is growing in her, don't you think that first couple are thinking, could this be the son? Is this the one? Is this the son that's going to come and inaugurate God's intention? And Cain is born. Not long after that, he murders his brother Abel. And Adam and Eve say, he's probably not the son. Probably not him. And then other sons come, and eventually we come to one of those descendants, and his name is Abraham, or Abram. And then the promises in Act 3 begin to coalesce around 4 themes. So here are the clarified promises that God gives all the way at the beginning of Act 3. The Lord said to Abram, go from your country, your people, and your father's household. Go to the land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. And all peoples on the earth will be blessed through you. Now, if you look at those words, you'll see a 4-fold promise that God gives. And all of those folds become real important as the rest of the story continues. God says to Abraham, I'm going to make your name great. I'm going to make you into a great nation. You're going to be a great blessing. I'm sending you on a great mission. A great name, a great nation, a great blessing, a great mission. God must have a great sense of humor. When God gives Abraham this promise, he's 75 years old. What's the one thing you need for all of that 4-fold promise to come about? You need kids. You need kids. Abraham's 75, his wife Sarah's 65. My guess is if you're 75 and 65 and you don't have kids, by that point you don't want any, right? But not just that. Do you know what Abram means? That's his name. It starts out, Abram. Abram means father. Imagine what a laughingstock Abram was at happy hour. Here comes the father. How many kids you got, Abraham? None. Dad. Yeah, right? God changes his name from Abram, father, to Abraham. You know what Abraham means? Father of many nations. Abraham probably says to God, do you hate me or what? I mean, I've been a laughingstock with my old name. Now I get a new name, Father of Many Nations. I'm like 80 years old. I don't have any kids, and you're making my name Father of Many Nations. I'm nothing but a joke. You know, as you read through the rest of the acts in the story, you discover that God seems to like to choose the least likely to succeed. And looking at this group, you should be happy at that. Right? I mean, he chooses those that apparently are never going to make it. And so in the high school yearbook, Abraham is the least likely to succeed. God, oh, just my kind of people right there, right? Some of you may not have done real well in school. Yeah, God may use somebody like you. You're a doofus on the athletic field. God may use somebody like you. You see, if you have a big resume, lots of skills, God can use all of that. And there are examples in this story of people like Paul that are, multi-talented, incredibly gifted. But God also likes to use the least likely to succeed. Why do you think that is? Well, I don't know the whole reason, but I think part of the reason is if he chooses the least likely to succeed, when he does an incredible work through them, there's no question of who really did it, right? I mean, Abraham eventually has a son when he's 100. Sarah's 90. Here's my guess. Everybody knew something was going, this was a God thing in this cradle, right? That stuff doesn't happen. God likes the least likely to succeed, so he shares the credit with no one when it comes through. Abraham, the fourfold promise. Well, Abraham and Sarah have Isaac, and Isaac has Jacob, and Jacob has 12 sons. And those 12 sons wind up getting enslaved down in Egypt, and they're there for like 400 years. Eventually, Moses gets raised up as a deliverer, and he's called to go back and deliver them. He can't even see the promised land because he messes up. Joshua leads the people of God into the promised land. They go through a period of judges where everybody does what's right in their own mind. They're all driven by their own thing. And eventually, they ask for a king. The first king they get, King Saul, he's a bust. He looked like a great king, right? He was a head taller than everybody else. He had muscles bulging out of his turtleneck. The second king is David. He plays a harp, all right? Now, here's what I'm saying. If you had a choice of a king, I'll take the big muscled guy, not the harp player. If there are any harp players here, forgive me, but I'm kind of thinking, if you play the harp, you need to turn in your man card, all right? So they wind up with a king who plays a harp, but God announces, this is a guy after my own heart. And if people were astute in understanding the story, maybe they begin to say, could he be the son? Could this guy be the son? Well, eventually David commits adultery and murder, so people say, he's probably not the son. That's probably not the one. And so the time moves on, and by the time you come to the end of Act 3, which is the end of the Old Testament, things are looking pretty hopeless and helpless. I mean, everybody's a mess. All of the results and consequences of sin are running rampant. There doesn't seem to be anything that's going to change. But that's not the end of the story. When you turn from Malachi to Matthew, you move to the climax of the story. You see, Act 4 is the climax, and in Act 4, God appears. That's the name of that act. What did God do when he appeared? Well, you can read through the 4 Gospels and read what Jesus did when he showed up. But let me just read a couple of verses that, kind of in a thumbnail sketch, tell us what he did. Jesus went through all the towns and villages, teaching in their synagogues, proclaiming the good news of the kingdom, and healing every disease and sickness. When he saw the crowds, he had compassion on them because they were harassed and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. What did God do when he showed up? He saw lepers that were outcasts, untouchables, and he touched them. He saw people that were blind and couldn't see. He healed them. People that were hungry came to him, and he fed them. People that were dead were raised by him. Religious people were told a better way. Rich people were told to not trust their stuff, but to trust in God's provision. Jesus came to inaugurate God's original intention. You see, all those miracles that he did and all those stories that he told, what are they? They're hints They're previews. They're hors d'oeuvres of the kingdom. They're all pointing to God's original intention and the ultimate destination. Jesus just doesn't do miracles. He doesn't do miracles to prove he's powerful. He does miracles that show God's original intention and point to the ultimate destination. The miracles all happen within the storyline, pointing back to the beginning and also to the end. Oh, yeah. But thus far, those things don't solve the biggest problem, right? You see, alienation from our bodies, disease and decay, alienation from other people, disconnection, isolation, alienation from ourselves, alienation from the world. In a sense, they're all symptoms of the bigger problem. We're alienated from God, remember? God put the tree of authority in the garden, and we rejected his authority and chose to do it our own way. You know, the Bible often speaks of sin metaphorically as a debt. You know, when you steal something, you've incurred a debt. When somebody steals some of your stuff, they incur a debt. And you're either going to pay for it or they're going to pay for it. Something's going to happen to make it right. Sin is like a debt. You know what it feels like to have a debt forgiven or a debt repaid? Do you know what it feels like to pay that debt yourself? May and June are commencement months. And I've been to more commencement than any human being should ever have to go to, all right? They have to be the most boring, difficult things to make it through, right? I'm not a pomp guy, circumstance. I don't like any of that. I don't like the funny hat, the funny clothes. I don't like any of that. And usually you get these boring speakers that nobody comes to hear them, but I think they must think that they do because they keep talking. Everybody wants to go home. Somebody think, yeah, tell me about it. I'm experiencing it right now. Well, sorry, we got a couple acts to go, all right? Well, anyway, I read about a commencement that happened a couple of years ago, and the president of a Midwestern university decided he needed to figure a way to raise money, which is what presidents of universities do. They really don't run the school. They really raise money. That's what they're supposed to do. So this guy had a brilliant idea, which lots of presidents have done before and after. The night before graduation, he brings together some of the stellar students, some of the cream of the crop, along with some of the key donors. And he gets them together and has a little reception. And he'll ask a few of the great students to kind of tell their story, their experience while they were at the school, what they plan to do after for the next couple of years. Well, this particular evening, that's what this guy did the night before graduation, gets some of these big donors together, gets a few of the great students together. And a couple of the students that tell their stories tell a remarkable thing. The first girl gets up and she says something like this. I've decided that I am not going to enter the workforce. I'm actually not going to use my degree immediately. I've decided that I'm going to take the next 5 years, I'm going to go overseas to a third world country, and I'm going to serve those that are disadvantaged and under-resourced. Then I'll come back, I'll launch my career, but I hope that my life will be different forever because of the time I spend overseas. That's pretty admirable, right? The second young lady gets up to speak. Unbeknownst to the first lady or the second, she says almost the same thing. I decided I'm giving the first few years of my years after graduation overseas as well. She was going to a different country doing the same thing. Well, anyway, they share the story, and a lot of the donors are kind of impressed, and they come up and shake the girl's hands. But there was this one donor in the back, real eccentric guy, which is a nice way to say really weird guy, right? Sitting in the back, all kind of weirded out. Nobody's really talking to him. He didn't even stand up when anybody else was talking. Didn't really talk to too many people. He was dressed a little strange. But after most of the people left, he went up and he grabbed the two young ladies, walked over to the president, and he said, I was really moved by your future, what you plan to do. So he said to the first young lady, tell me, while you were at the university, did you incur any debt? Do you have any student loans? Well, the first lady kind of bowed her head, and she said, yeah. She said, I owe about $80,000 in student loan dollars. I said, oh. He then said to the second young lady, how about you? Did you incur debt? She said, I wish I owed $80,000. I owe just north of $100,000 in debt. And this really strange old guy said, I'll tell you what, on Monday morning, I want the two of you and you, Mr. President, to meet me in the business office. I want to pay both of these debts off. That Monday morning, that businessman wrote 2 checks, one for $80,000 and one for $100,000. Now here's my question. How do you think those 2 girls left the business office? You think they were happy? Think they were excited? They're kind of jumping around, right? Maybe a tear of joy running down their cheek, phone calls to be made, excitement to be had. You ever wonder why some Christians are moved to become slobbering idiots when they sing Amazing Grace? You ever wonder why some people in church can't finish the words to some songs? You ever wonder why some people, when they tell their story about the forgiveness that Jesus offered, they can't continue, they have to stop and take a breath? Because when somebody pays your debt, it's a moving experience. Those 2 girls could have gotten a job, could have worked really hard, could have lived a disciplined life, and paid off their student loans. Friend, you and I stand no shot of ever working off the sin debt that we've incurred to a holy God. But in Act 4, Jesus comes to bring reconciliation, and he does so by taking all of your sin debt, putting it on his shoulders, and paying for it in full. That's the climax of the story. Everything moves to and flows from that. Now, lots of church-going people and lots of Christians live as if that's the last act in the story. And some of you are thinking, and if it was, we could get out. Well, it's not the last act. And therefore, we can't end because that's not the last act. There's an Act 5 that comes after that. That's the climax, but Act 5 comes. In Act 5, God sends. Act 5, he sends. Now, I could read lots of different passages to talk about God sending, but I want to go back to the passage I read from Matthew 9. And I just want to continue reading, because Act 4 is always connected to Act 5. You know, Jesus had a problem. He was always attracting spectators. And he kept stopping the spectating and sending them out as participants. We still have that problem. We want to be spectators rather than participants. So let's go back to the verses, and this time I'll keep reading. Jesus went through all the towns and villages, teaching in their synagogues, proclaiming the good news of the kingdom, and healing every disease and sickness. When he saw the crowds, he had compassion on them because they were harassed and helpless like sheep without a shepherd. Then, he continues, right? Then he said to them, to his disciples, the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Ask the Lord of the harvest to send out workers into the harvest field. And chapter 9 flows into chapter 10. And in chapter 10, the very disciples that he said pray, now he tells them to go. So here's how it works. Jesus said, I've come to do these things. Pray that God would raise up other people to continue what I started. Oh yeah, and you become part of what I started too. You're not called to be a spectator. You've been designed, gifted, and called to get off the bench and out of the locker room onto the playing field as a participant. If you've ever driven on Delaware Avenue, past Port 82, you've probably seen a picture of that. Or if not a picture, you saw the real thing. That is the SS United States. It's actually disintegrating there in the Delaware River as it kind of rusts and is falling apart. There have been lots of attempts to kind of get it refurbished, and they just can't seem to raise enough money to do it. Well, if you were to do a little research, a little investigation, you would discover that the SS United States was built to be a troop carrier. It was designed to transport troops faster and at longer distances without stopping than a ship had ever functioned before. In fact, the SS United States still holds a couple of transatlantic records, speed records, and in the time it took from one side to the other. How many troops do you think this troop carried? This ship that was designed as a troop carrier, how many troops do you think the SS United States ever carried? Any guess? 0. Never carried a troop. Why is that? Well, because the SS United States, who was built for the mission of transporting troops, was co-opted by consumers. And she became a luxury cruise ship. 600 state-of-the-art classrooms. 3 top-shelf restaurants. First ship, air conditioning everywhere on board. Never carried a troop. Carried consumers. for their enjoyment and their pleasure traveled around in the sea. Now look, here, as I'm looking at it, I think that that's probably an upgrade for a boat, all right? If you're going to go from a troop carrier to a cruise ship, that's probably an upgrade. It's not an upgrade for a church. If Jesus built and designed a church for a mission to continue what he started, and it's been co-opted by consumers for their enjoyment and what they want, that's not an upgrade. That's a sad situation. But sometimes that's exactly what it feels like, doesn't it? Jesus said, I went on a mission, and he invites his church to follow him in it. But often, it's co-opted by those who want enjoyment, those who want to cruise around and just have a good time. Well, there is one more act to the story. Act 6 is God restores. Let me read a couple of my favorite verses. These may not be your favorite verses from Act number 6, from Revelation 21. So when you speak at the Tabernacle, you can choose your favorite verses. All right, here's mine. I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and there was no longer any sea. I saw the holy city, the New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride, beautifully dressed for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, Look, God's dwelling is now among the people, and they will dwell with him. They will be his people, and God himself will be with them and be their God. He will wipe every tear from their eyes. There will no longer be any death or mourning or crying or pain, for the old order of things has passed away. So here's the summary. No tissues in Act 6, because you'll never get a cold. You'll never shed a tear. No sickness, no cancer, no divorce, no oppression, no poverty, no broken hearts, no abuse, no pain, no funerals, no long boring sermons, no more sin, but there will be peace, harmony, and partnership forever. What are you going to do with this big story? If that's the storyline, well, here are a couple of things I invite you to do. When you consider the 6 acts of the story, God creates, God's rejected, God promises, God appears, God sends, God restores. Always remember where you are. See, you are here, that's where you are. We're in Act 5. And if that story isn't your story, you need to read your life into this story. You need to come clean and come back to God and trust that Jesus' provision is good for you, and now his story becomes your story. Oh yeah. And from here until the end of your life, write your part of the story well. Because just like the characters in the Bible wrote their little part of the story, right now you and I are writing ours. Write wisely, write well, and may the themes of the big story be the themes of our lives and the things that we write and the way that we live. Let's stand and pray. Father, we give you thanks for this awesome story. More importantly, we give you thanks that through Christ, that can be and is our story. Lord, may we write well our little chapter. May we write carefully as we look back to the climax of Christ and we look forward to the restoration of all things. We pray in Jesus' name, who made that possible. Amen.
Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not to your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct your paths.